Mr. Keurig.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I wish to withdraw my motion.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Keurig. Given that Mr. Keurig wishes to withdraw his motion, as was the business that we were in the midst of discussing, he would need unanimous consent to do so. Do I have unanimous consent of this committee to do that? Okay, motion withdrawn. Madam Shanahan. Oh, sorry, just one moment. I have a speaker's list. Madam Shanahan is next. However, if you're calling a point of order, I'm happy to entertain that.
Pour la proposition d'hier, la proposition qu'avait...
Well, regarding the proposal that was tabled, Madame Gaudreau, I would like to table that today.
To do that. Unfortunately, right now would be a point of order, and you would not be able to move a motion on that point of order. However, I will add you to the speakers list after Ms. Shanahan, who is next. At that point in time, you would be allowed to move your motion.
Quel point d'ordre? Parce que je comprends.
What point of order? Because Mr. Curry said that he was asking for his motion to be withdrawn. And I think we had unanimous consent. So we're not, I don't see why we'd be in a point of order. We're in the normal meeting.
Mr. Forte, if this isn't a point of order, then I'm actually not able to acknowledge you right now because Ms. Shanahan is next on my speaking list.
I do have a point of
order. Quel point of order? No?
I don't understand. There's not a point of order.
Okay.
Right after Ms. Shanahan, and then Mr. Green.
Point of order.
You want to do a point of order?
Genuine point of order, Madam Chair. There's something wrong with my device here. If I could get that fixed, because I can't get any amplification or translation or anything through it. So
that is a severe problem. Let us get that looked after for you.
That's right.
Did you hear that? Mr. Garrison does not have translation or volume. Let me suspend momentarily until we can get this little problem fixed. Calling the committee back. We begin with Madam Shanahan and then Mr. Fortin and then Mr. Green. Madam Shanahan.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to give notice of motion at this time that in relation to the motion passed on July 22nd to ensure the privacy and security of this personal information of Canadians, the committee adopt the following procedures for the handling of these documents. That the documents not be emailed to members, staff, or anyone else. That for the consideration of the documents during in-camera meetings, numbered paper copies be provided to committee members by the clerk at the start of any meeting at which they will be considered, and that they be returned to the clerk at the end of the meeting. That no staff and no mobile or electronic devices be allowed for the duration of the in-camera meeting. That the documents be held in the clerk's office, and that outside of in-camera committee meetings, members may only view the documents in the clerk's office, and that no mobile or electronic devices may be in the room when the documents are being reviewed. And I believe we have copies. On a la même motion en français. Oui.
Thank you. Monsieur Forte.
Well, thank you. Now, yesterday, Ms. Gaudreau gave notice of motion. Notice of a motion that we wish to table today. I will do so now. In view of the current situation, in view of the admissions of the Minister of Finance presented yesterday to having obtained remuneration from We Charity and having placed himself in a conflict of interest, the committee requests his immediate resignation.
Thank you. Having moved this motion, we now move into debate on this motion. Mr. Green.
I feel like the need to state what I feel to be the obvious is that as a committee who hasn't had Mr. Morneau before us in any official capacity, that it would be premature at this point for us to call on his resignation when it's, you know, quite within the political rights of the leaders of any party to make those kind of statements or any individual members. I just think that as a committee who hasn't had the opportunity to fully explore this with Mr. Morneau, we are ending at a conclusion that we haven't actually explored as a committee. So I just think that it's a bit premature, and I won't be able to support this at the moment.
Mr. Forte.
Oui, OK. Écoutez, Madame la Présidente,
I understand the reservations that my colleague has stated, but I would say that this situation is very unusual. I know that we haven't heard from Mr. Morneau, and I'm also looking forward to hearing from him. I have important questions for him. However, numerous facts have already been established and have been made public. We can't simply ignore those public facts. Mr. Morneau hasn't denied taking these actions. On the contrary, he has admitted it. He has admitted that he placed himself in a situation of conflict of interest during the meeting where he decided to vote in favor of a contract for We Charity, and he has apologized for that. So from that point on, from the point where he's admitted it and he's said sorry, I mean, it's all very well, but there's a practical consequence to all this. He's admitted to a serious mistake, and I don't think it is premature for this committee to adopt the resolution that I'm moving here. So I would invite you to vote in favor of this.
Ms. Shanahan.
Yes, on the motion that is before us, I just feel it's my duty to point out that it's a motion that precludes the conclusion to the study that we are going to be undertaking, and as such, I cannot support it.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Mr. Barrett.
Yeah, so with respect to the motion, yesterday we did hear from the finance minister that his acknowledgement of receiving in excess of $40,000 in sponsored travel or a gift from a third-party agency, and that he did repay that yesterday before he gave his testimony at the Finance Committee. That in and of itself is the travel, as well as the failure to disclose. There's multiple areas where I have written to the ethics commissioner asking for an examination of those facts. The problem that we're faced with as parliamentarians is that we have a member of cabinet who finds himself or places himself in these situations where I find it impossible to give him the benefit of the doubt, having been found guilty of breaking the act on a previous occasion. In this occasion, a very, in my opinion, cavalier response to a very serious situation in the House in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic on a number of occasions in record amounts of funds. All parties have given unanimous consent to support unbelievable amounts of money, incredible measures in support of Canadians during the pandemic. This has to be done in the context of having confidence in the people that are executing on these actions, and the integrity of the institutions and the integrity of the offices that we occupy they have to be preserved, and the occupant of these positions, of these cabinet positions, they're there temporarily, and they will be replaced by someone else, and that next person may be from the same party or another party, and then that person too will be replaced. But they are caretakers and responsible to ensure the public's confidence. We have a large sum of money in that $40,000 figure that was not paid by the minister when he was taking travel. The organization with which he was traveling said last night that the reason they offer these trips is to showcase their work and to solicit support. The lack of judgment in this situation, as unfortunate as it may be, as contrite as the minister might be at this time, when we're almost certainly going to be back in the House looking for unanimous consent on support for Canadians, and it's going to be this minister who's looking for it. When viewed through that lens, I don't have confidence in the Minister of Finance, and would be inclined to and will be supporting this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Keurig.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I hear something often from my constituents, and it's that one needs to take action. And the way that's expressed, whether it be in-person conversations or over the phone or email or letters, and it's incumbent upon all of us to do just that. Now, at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, action was taken. All parties got together, and although there has been disagreement and significant disagreement about aspects of that response throughout the last number of months, action was taken. And now Canadians still expect their government to be able to work for them, to be able to deal with the issues at hand, the challenges that they're facing. And I know I hear often from members of all parties that there is a focus, needs to be a clear focus on serving Canadians. And we have, yet again, this Liberal government embroiled in a scandal that is taking away from the ability for their government to be able to do the very most basic work that they've been tasked to do. With the revelations that we heard yesterday, Madam Chair, it is absolutely unprecedented to forget to pay back $41,000, to take an illegal trip when you are a part of a cabinet, when it specifically precludes you from being allowed to do that. These are serious, not just allegations, but serious admissions. And Canadians expect that their government works for them, and Canadians expect that each and every one of us are willing to take action. And certainly, I plan to be supporting this motion because there is no doubt that this finance minister has lost certainly my confidence but the confidence of Canadians, and is distracting from the work that Canadians expect their finance minister, regardless of who they voted for. Canadians expect better. Canadians deserve better. So, Madam Chair, I plan to support this motion put forward by the Bloc because it's time that there's some accountability. It's time that action is taken to help restore trust in the institutions of government, in Parliament. And my honorable friend, Mr. Barrett, made a very good point. We are caretakers of the offices we hold, whether that be as a member of Parliament, whether that be as a committee chair, a member of a committee, whether that be a member of cabinet or the Prime Minister himself. We are caretakers, and we must do just that. Take the utmost care, because it is Canadians that hold us to the high standards that we should strive for, and it is unbelievable, quite frankly, what we've been seeing, the actions of certain members of the Liberal government. So with that, I plan to support this motion. Thank you.
Mr. Green.
I do feel compelled to say this and share the sentiments of my friend Tom, who harkens back to a time when the rule used to be that if you got caught, you fell on the sword, and you did the honorable thing, that you were expected to do that. And I don't think that that's going to happen here because, quite frankly, I don't think there is systems for true accountability in place. And I hope to get to that in my next speaking slot. So while I agree with the sentiments of the folks who will support this, I still don't believe that it's incumbent on this committee to do it, but I do think it's incumbent on this minister to consider what the old rule used to be, that if you got caught in situations like this, you would do the honorable thing and step down. So I'll just put those statements on the record, but I will not be supporting the motion.
All right. At this time, I will proceed to a vote on... Yes, of course. So I will proceed to a vote. Over to the clerk.
On the motion of Monsieur Fortin, please say yay when your name is called if you are in favor of the motion, nay if you're against. Mr. Fergus?
No.
Madame Shanahan?
No.
Mr. Gerritsen?
No.
Mr. Scarpaleggia?
No.
Madame Lalonde?
No.
Mr. Barrett?
Yes.
Mr. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Carrick?
Yes.
Monsieur Fortin?
Oui.
Mr. Green?
That'll be a nay.
Yes, 4. No, 6. Therefore, it falls. I will continue on with my speaking list. Mr. Green is next. I will add Ms. Shanahan, and I will add Mr. Keurig.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to, at this point in time, table a motion that was presented as a notice on July 14th by my colleague, Mr. Charlie Angus. And this is a motion for the Standing Committee on the Access of Information, Privacy, and Ethics, that whereas there is a culture of ethical permissiveness around the Prime Minister, and whereas the Prime Minister has twice been found to be in contravention of the Conflict of Interest Act and is under investigation for a third potential breach, and whereas the Prime Minister's office thus appears to lack the capability or an inclination to adequately advise the Prime Minister with respect to the avoidance of conflicts of interest or the appearance of conflicts of interest in compliance with Canadian law, the committee move that pursuant to Standing Order 108.3H, the committee undertake a study of the policies, procedures, practices surrounding ethical conduct and avoidance of conflict of interest within the Prime Minister's office, including testimony from the Clerk of the Privy Council, Ian Sugart, and Katie Telford, Chief of Staff of the Prime Minister's office, and that the committee, upon completion of its study, issue a report with recommendations to better permit the Prime Minister's office to conduct the business of government with public confidence in its integrity. And if I may now take a moment to speak to this. Clearly it's the purview of this committee, as we've just discussed and debated in the previous motions, to, in the present tense, hold accountable members of government and decisions that are made by government. But what has been made very clear throughout this entire debate is the repeated ethical violations and the apparent lack of ethical standards being applied. We have watched that occur at almost every step along the way for this WE scandal, and of course in previous transgressions by not just the Liberal government, but I would say the Conservative past governments as well. So what's clear is that there's what appears to be clear is that there's very little staff safeguarding against these repeated conflicts, that there's no systems and principles in place to ensure that a minister doesn't take a $40,000 paid trip, which I should note for the context for Canadians watching. In my riding at Hamilton Centre, the average household income is $43,000, just by context. It's significant. And yet it appears that for some people, the rules just don't apply to them. That for some people within power and access and privilege, that they seem to can't help themselves from helping themselves. And so, it'd be remiss on us to kind of go around the table time and time again, every time there's a scandal, doing the gotcha. And I'll admit, part of this is about that. It's about holding people accountable in the moment. But I think it's incumbent on us through this study, and I hope to get support from everybody, that we come out of this committee with clear recommendations and systems and principles in place to ensure that we can restore the public confidence in the government and in the government's integrity, because that is really fundamentally what's at stake, Madam Chair. I'll go so far as to say the discourse in the public, the standard is so low. The public opinion of public office holders is so low that it's just generally accepted that the transgressions that have happened are acceptable. Why? Well, Liberals will say because Conservatives did it, and Conservatives will say because Liberals did it, and so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, what I'm hoping for, and what my colleague has led in this regard, and Mr. Charlie Angus, is that as a committee, we can come together in the true mandate of our committee in a nonpartisan way to have very clear direction back to future governments, future ministers, future holders of power, where their parameters are. So there could be no ambiguity around this. And so it is certainly my hope, given the testimony that's been provided by the government side and by the opposition, that we can all be aligned on this motion in support of Charlie Angus's motion to call this as a study, and then to come out of this with something concrete that we can recommend back to the House to be adopted that strengthens these policies and procedures to ensure that staff adequately provide that safeguard against the missteps of elected officials. The question was put to Minister Garneau, have you read the Conflict of Interest Act? His response was telling. He said it was made available to me. I know as a new backbench MP in the fourth party opposition, Madam Chair, that was something that was brought to my attention that we had to read, we had to do an orientation of. It's in the mandate letters of ministers. Certainly the Prime Minister in writing the mandate letters understands this. So I can't accept that these are just lapses in judgment. This is a culture of ethical permissiveness. And so I'm calling on support of members of this committee and look forward to hearing their feedback. And I'm sure that there'll be conversations around past judgments regarding our party as well, and how standards are applied to different parties in different scenarios. So I'm here for that, and I appreciate the indulgence of this committee and ask for their support.
Mr. Green, thank you. Next on my speaking list is Mr. Barrett.
Actually, I'll yield my time. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Fergus.
Actually, didn't want to speak to this motion. I want to speak to another matter, but please, I yield my time as well.
Okay. Mr. Lloyd.
Yeah, I just want to say I thank my colleague from the NDP for bringing this forward, and from the outset, I'll say I'll be supporting this motion. However, I don't want my support to be construed in any way to say that, that the Prime Minister can blame a process, or any public office holder can blame processes or the advisors around them, when it is they who set the standard for their teams. And from what I've experienced in my various careers, is that you can have as good of a process as you want, but if you have people that are not committed to upholding that process and to acting in an ethical manner, then they will find ways around that. So I will be supporting this motion, but I don't want anything to detract from the fact that it's the public office holders that need to be held accountable for their own actions.
Mr. Barrett.
And Madam Chair, just as I look at it, at the motion, I would like to give the committee more, and I'll be supporting the motion, but I would like to make an amendment to it. I'd like to move an amendment. So if you'll just give me one moment here. Okay. And so I won't read the full motion, and I'll provide this in writing to the clerk, if that's okay. I'll just hand it right to you. And the amendment is as follows. The line that includes practices surrounding ethical conduct and avoidance of conflicts of interest within the Prime Minister's office. Then we would strike including testimony from. And we would add that the witnesses must include, but are not limited to, the following. And then the original motion continues: the clerk of the Privy Council, Ian Shugart, etc. Yes, ma'am.
Je n'ai pas le texte de la proposition. Est-ce que c'est possible?
I do not have the text of the motion. Is it possible to have it in written form?
Idéalement, oui.
Unless, because it's an amendment to the motion that is on the table.
That doesn't include.
Oh.
Yeah.
We're talking about the actual motion. If we could get a copy of the actual motion, that'd be beneficial for members.
Sure. So the motion was put forward. A notice of the motion was given by Mr. Angus, and it is available within the website for this committee. The clerk has asked that you access it electronically because of COVID-19. We are not giving out paper documents.
There.
So the clerk is able to email it out if that is the desire.
Could you email to P9, please? Could I be on the list too to speak?
Mr. Gerritsen.
Can I speak to it?
Of course, but just one moment.
After the amendment, please.
Oh, so sorry, you wish to be added to the original motion speaking list? Okay, thank you for the clarification. Okay, so moving forward then with speaking to the amendment, now moved by Mr. Barrett.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
My staff will bring a printed copy of the original motion with the amendment highlighted to the door in just about 1 minute.
How that is amazingly accommodating. Thank you, Mr. Barrett.
I hope in both official languages, and I hope members take that into consideration when considering.
Mr. Barrett, I'm sure they will do no less. If it's the will of the committee, I'm happy to suspend for 1 minute while we wait for those documents so that you have paper in front of you. Yes? Okay, suspend. One. Mr. Barrett would like to just clarify the amendment that he has made here. Mr. Barrett.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So the
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Bon, alors le document qu'on vient de vous donner, j'ai surligné l'amendement et on a déjà enlevé le libellé initial.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. I will now hear from the floor. Any speakers? Ms. Shanahan.
Yeah, I would like to move a, just getting some clarity here. I'd like to move a sub-amendment to remove this amendment, because the witness list, I guess I'm just not understanding what, it's the committee that determines the witnesses. So I'm seeing redundancy, I'm seeing overlap, and so I have to vote against this amendment, and I'd like at this time to move a sub-amendment to remove this amendment.
Madam Shanahan,
Yeah, and the witnesses. The names of the witnesses, yeah. I would like to move the sub-amendment to remove this amendment and the names of the witnesses, because that's the prerogative of this committee, is to name the witnesses. The prerogative of this committee is to name, is that we determine the witnesses as we go into subcommittee and so on.
You can vote against it, and then you can propose.
Amendment is an amendment to the amendment. That's the whole point.
But so as not to negate it. It's dilatory.
Yeah.
You can add through a sub-amendment.
Madam
You can't
Shanahan,
negate the
sorry, I am a
original.
little bit confused by the sub-amendment. So I'm going to
vote
ask the
against it and
clerk
then
to
provide
confer
an
with you.
Okay, very good.
So I'm just going to suspend the meeting just for one moment, please.
It's dilatory.
Okay.
What's that?
Floor is yours.
So, in the helpful blue highlighting of the amendment, so we keep that the witnesses, and then my sub-amendment starts, be determined by the committee, and then thereafter be deleted until Prime Minister's office.
The witnesses be determined by the committee. And then how would we finish it?
And then delete the next two lines. So delete, but are not limited to the following: the clerk of the Privy Council, Ian Shugart, Katie Telford, Chief of Staff, the Prime Minister's office. Delete to there.
Okay, so that, can you just, it's unclear to me, sorry. I'm going to need you just to state it. So I understand the deletions. So that the witnesses
be determined by the committee.
Mm-hmm.
And then it would go to, and that the committee upon completion, so the motion continues.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you. Okay. Speakers to Ms. Shanahan's sub-amendment. Yes, Mr. Green.
Thank you. And while I appreciate that it's changed in terms of the scope in which you first presented, I believe that we're actually doing that right now, that we are deciding as a committee on this vote who we want to have before this study, as we just did in the last vote in terms of calling the Prime Minister, and I believe it also to be the case in previous scenarios. I know certainly with committees that I've sat on where within the main motion we've provided a scope that included certain people that we would call to testify, and I think that the sub-amendment, in fact, is allowing for future input, but the original parameters for which the motion has been put, I certainly stand by.
Thank you. Mr. Gerritsen.
I guess, you know, the confusion for me comes from the fact that if this is a study, and I think that the objective of a study like this is actually a very good thing. Most governance boards, most organizations would undertake this kind of work, and I think it's extremely relevant to an organization, and I think that it's good, especially if something like this has never been done before. But, you know, and I'll focus just on the resolve part of this right now, which is what we seem to be focusing on, where the amendment is. I don't understand why we would dictate within this motion who the witnesses specifically are to be. Like, if I was going to do a study on conflict of interest policies and setting up that infrastructure basically to be able to handle monitoring that kind of thing, the first thing I'd want to do is talk to a conflict of interest lawyer. But rather than that, what we see in here are political people that are playing in the politics. Like, if this is genuinely about doing a study, which I actually think is a really good thing, I don't know why these particular individuals are the first ones that are listed and completely leaving absent any kind of scholar or expert in the field of this particular issue. So that's why, you know, I thought we were trying to propose something through the sub-amendment that gives the committee the ability to go out and tap into whoever those resources are to bring them to the table so that you can get the best quality out of the individuals that come forward and the best testimony so that you can produce the best possible result to deliver back to Parliament. Because I think ultimately that's what this committee wants to do. But unfortunately, other than the clerk of the Privy Council, everybody else named here, just it seems to be more politically motivated than anything else. And I would never suggest that was the case with the intent of the motion, but I certainly comes across that way because you've completely neglected to include anybody that would give some kind of actual bona fide information in terms of how to set up that kind of policy. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Carrick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And regarding the sub-amendment and the amendment, and quite frankly, the motion, I've heard a number of my colleagues opposite. It's almost as if they've forgotten that their government is being absolutely rocked by scandal. Now, the amendment broadens the scope, which is exactly the intent that they seem to be painting with removing a few of the individuals that are specifically mentioned. But we've moved into some different territory here because we are in the middle of a massive scandal. So to name some individuals that are bringing on the need to see these issues studied, I think that it's distracting from the fact that we right now in this country have a government that is totally wrapped up in scandal. In the world, actually, you see foreign press talking about it. We see daily further revelations regarding this scandal. And certainly I think the amendment addresses the scope issue, but the sub-amendment distracts from what needs to be accomplished by this committee, and that is restoring the trust that Canadians have put in their publicly elected officials.
Mr. Gerritsen.
Well, that's not what the motion's about. Because this is an interesting turn of events, with all due respect, Mr. Kirk, but the NDP introduced a motion that was specifically about, doing a study. Mr. Barrett attempted to broaden the scope of it by including more witnesses. We put forward a sub-amendment that would even increase that even more, and you've completely reverted back to talking about current scandal that's going on. So that actually just supports what I previously said, that it appears as though this is more politically motivated than a genuine study of this report, which is extremely troubling. And please correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Madam Shanahan is next, then Mr. Keurig.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think in the interest, and maybe because we've had the benefit in the subcommittee of talking about the motion that was passed yesterday and the kind of witnesses and study that we're going to be doing there. For me, ultimately, I can't support this motion because it is redundant to the work that we're already doing. We spoke at length about how difficult it is to work during this time with the limits put onto us by COVID, how difficult it will be to bring witnesses here and so on. And it seems to me these motions were brought and all around about the same time. I think they were trying to achieve maybe in different words, but more or less the same object. So for me, ultimately, the motion is redundant to the work that we're already engaged to do.
Thank you. Mr. Keurig.
Yeah, I'd certainly like to move forward, but just in brief response. Look, there's a government that's being rocked by a scandal. We're seeing that there needs to be a full evaluation, as the motion, I think, quite clearly lays out, of a lot of things regarding the ethics laws of this country, so that we can move back to restoring the trust that Canadians expect of their politicians and their public institutions. So I'd leave it at that.
Thank you. Mr. Barrett.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I having heard Ms. Shanahan's comments, I don't want to debate at length the sub-amendment if the mover is not intending to vote for the amended motion. The mover of the sub-amendment is not intending to vote for the main motion. So if the intention is not to get this across the goal line, then I'm satisfied with the intent of the mover, of the main motion, and I think that it's sufficiently broad with the amendment to the main motion, and I will vote against the sub-amendment proposed.
Mr. Gerritsen.
I mean, I think it's entirely appropriate to vote in favor of an amendment and then vote against a motion as amended. sometimes not as bad is better than bad. I saw Conservatives, Mr. Broussard, as well as a number of others, do it on proc recently when we were going on about virtual voting. Conservatives clearly didn't want that, but they were okay with voting in favor of amendments that made things weaker, fully intending not to vote for a motion afterwards. So it happens, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with it either. But, just coming back to the point that Mr. Kirk made, I don't think there's anything wrong with talking about what he wants to talk about. But then I just beg the question of why did he withdraw his motion? His motion specifically was about that. Now we're debating something that is actually a genuine policy that's being brought forward by the NDP. And he would rather talk about what his motion was about during this. So I'm confused by the discussion that's going on at the table today. But I digress. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Fergus.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Tout d'abord, j'aimerais...
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to say that what I see as the essence of the motion tabled by Mr. Green is a motion that interests me greatly, and I think Mr. Garretson explained why. I think it's very relevant to our committee's work. It enables us to examine existing policies. We can talk to academics, experts who are very familiar with this field. And in this way, we can look at it, we can make recommendations, and propose new policies which will benefit not only the current government, but hopefully all future governments. I know that politics can come into this, and we saw that perhaps at the beginnings of this motion. That's just how it is. But I would say that Ms. Shanahan's sub-amendment could give us the chance to have a motion which is a bit more appropriate, and I think it would get much wider support. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Fergus. I will move to a vote on the sub-amendment. You may. I will ask the clerk to do that at this time.
All in favor of the sub-amendment of Madame Shanahan, please say yay when your name is called, or nay if you are opposed. Mr. Fergus.
Oui.
Madame Shanahan.
Yay.
Mr. Garretson.
Yes.
Mr. Scarpellegia.
Yes.
Mr. Amos.
Oui.
Mr. Barrett.
No.
Mr. Lloyd.
No.
Mr. Kirk.
No.
Monsieur Fortin.
No.
And Mr. Green.
No.
Thank you. The vote is tied with 5 voting yes and 5 voting no. As chair, I vote no. Moving then to the motion to be, the amendment to the motion as moved by Mr. Barrett. I have no other speakers on the list, so I will move to a vote on the amendment. Yes. So again, we are voting on the amendment as brought forward by Mr. Barrett.
Order. So this
Mr.
is the
Garrison.
part that says that the witnesses must include but are not limited to the following?
Yes, so this is the addition of what you see highlighted in blue.
Thank you.
Correct. Okay.
All in favor of the amendment of Mr. Barrett, please say yay when your name is called. All those opposed, please say nay when your name is called. Mr. Fergus.
No.
Madame Shanahan.
No.
Mr. Garrettson.
No.
Mr. Garrettson?
He said
No.
no.
I'm sorry. Mr.
No.
Scarpaleggia?
No.
Mr. Amos?
No.
Mr. Barrett?
Yes.
Mr. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Couric?
Yes.
Monsieur Fortin?
Oui.
Mr. Green?
Wait.
Again, we have a tie, 5 voting yes and 5 voting no. As chair, I vote we. Moving then to the motion. Yes, Ms. Shanahan.
Could we have the speakers list?
It's not a point of
Speakers
order.
list.
It's not a point of
Well-
order. I'll tell you what, though, we've covered quite a bit of ground, so I'll definitely give that to you. The speakers list going forward on this motion, I have Mr. Garrettson and then Mr. Green. Mr. Fergus also asked to be added to this list, and so I am adding him as well. Ms. Shanahan, you will be after Mr. Fergus. All right. Mr. Garrettson, the floor is yours with regards to the motion being discussed.
Thank you. So when I was speaking earlier to the amendment, I said that I would speak to the resolve part and then get to the whereas part afterwards. And I will reiterate what I said earlier, which is that I actually think that doing this study is very important. And although I'm not a permanent member of this committee, I hope that some good information comes out of this study or any study similar to this that can help inform all elected officials, and in particular those in cabinet position as is being sought out in this motion. And I say this with all due respect to the NDP, but I see this time and time again in the House. You get a motion that has, a pretty decent resolve clause that gives the direction to do something pretty good that I don't disagree with, but then you end up with the preceding whereas clauses to be the problematic ones, the ones that really don't even mean anything other than to put a statement on the record, because it's the resolve clauses that are the ones that really give direction to proceed. And so what you see in the whereas clauses are only one that is factually accurate, and 2 of the resolve clauses are opinions. And so basically, I say this with all due respect to the NDP member, but I saw this for 4 years in the last session of Parliament, where I can't end up voting for something because the resolve clauses, and you almost wonder if it's intentionally been set up that way as a bit of a poison pill to tempt you into voting for something, but then to leaving it open to the fact that you might end up voting for a whereas clause that you don't necessarily agree with. So, if the NDP member would be interested in removing those whereas clauses that specifically go after particular individuals and strip all of that out of the motion and just have the resolve clause that actually gives direction, it would definitely be a lot more palatable in terms of being able to vote in favor of and supporting what I think could actually end up being really good work that could come forward. But in the current form that it's in, with the 3 whereas clauses, 2 of which are really just opinions, I have a very difficult time supporting this motion. But I do want to reiterate that I think that this is very important work, and regardless of the outcome today, I hope that we can see substantive work come from this committee on this topic, because I think it's really important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gerritsen. Moving down the speakers list to Mr. Green.
Thank you. And to provide an opportunity of response, I myself am a substitute for Mr. Angus, and I would never want to pretend to speak on his behalf, nor would I want to impugn his motives. It is very clear that contextual from where we're at today, from where I sit, that there is, I think, some factual statements that have been made that go beyond opinion in terms of results from previous transgressions. And I think that regardless of, while I appreciate, the challenges the member might face in terms of the content of the preamble, I'm also confident that the results that will be had from successfully moving this motion here today will help us get to a better place in governance. Because we have to have accountability. Saying I'm sorry is not good enough. It's quite frankly, it just does not cut it. Saying I'm sorry is not being responsible. Being responsible means learning from your transgressions and changing. This is elementary stuff. None of this stuff is overly complicated in terms of allegations that have been made or things that have been made public. This is very clear-cut stuff. Things that I would hope learned, honorable members, and I should say this on the record now that I'm reminded of it, Madam Chair, I misspoke. I believe I said Garneau hadn't read it. Of course, it was Morneau. I believe maybe Garneau might speak a few languages. In fact, probably pretty well read. It was Morneau who made the admission by omission that he probably hadn't even read the Conflict of Interest Act, even though it was in his mandate. That's where we're at. And there's far too much at stake to simply sidestep this. I hope the member will recognize that as we walk through, all members opposite, as we walk through what will be no doubt a very delicate situation, balancing the privacy rights of private citizens with the need for openness and accountability and transparency at this table, that as a New Democrat, and I'm sure I can speak for my colleague, Mr. Angus, on this, we will always work to respect the private and delicate nature that we find ourselves in. But this is actually about getting to somewhere where the hope is future governments don't find themselves in the situation that this current government find themselves in. That's where we're at. So, again, I'll ask for members' full support. If we don't get it, I ask that this passes and we get into the work of this committee to provide the types of recommendations that will help improve the governance and help improve the democracy and accountability towards all Canadians, quite frankly. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the time. And my apologies to Mr. Garneau for misspeaking his name earlier. I don't want to have to stand up in the House of Commons and suggest I've misled this committee. So for the record, and quite clearly stated, it was Minister Morneau who suggested he hadn't read the Act when asked by my colleague, Mr. Angus.
Thank you, Mr. Green. The floor is Mr. Fergus's.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Et je m'excuse pour...
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I would just like to apologize to people who may be listening from home. I spent a few moments with the clerk to get some further information. I don't have the information I need right now, but I will nonetheless make some remarks, and if anyone here wishes to correct me, I'll be happy to withdraw my comments. I think that the motion that we're debating here, the main motion, substantively reflects the same content as the motion that we adopted with the vision yesterday at the committee. It's about the same study. It refers to the same witnesses. And substantively, it is essentially the same motion. I'm willing to stand corrected, but I believe that that's the case. We can't adopt two motions that would call upon the same witnesses that aim to discuss the same topics, that lead to the same conclusions. I hope to benefit from your analysis, Madam Chair, but if I remember correctly, these two motions are very similar in terms of what this committee would be studying. Based on that reasoning, I would like to get some advice or opinion from the chair or the clerk. Because my colleague was very helpful and has sent me some information, which I will read.
The motion that we had passed was, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that pursuant to Standing Orders 1083H, the committee review the safeguards which are in place to avoid and prevent conflicts of interest in federal government procurement, contracting, granting, contribution, and other expenditure policies, and that an order of the committee do issue to Speaker Spotlight for a copy of all records pertaining to speaking appearances arranged since October 14th, 2008 for Justin Trudeau, Sophie Grégoire Trudeau, Margaret Trudeau, Alexandre Trudeau, including in respect of each speaking appearance an indication of the fee provided, any expenses that were reimbursed, and the name of the company, organization, person, or entity booking it, provided that these records shall be provided to the committee, and that the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, and that they review, or I'm sorry, it says they reviewed, but I think it's in the present tense, they review in camera, and that this committee calls upon Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to appear before it. So it strikes me, Madame la Présidente, que c'est effectivement ce qu'on est en train.
Madam Chair, that this is essentially what we're debating today. The only difference is that there's another bit included saying that it would add 2 or 3 more names to the list and also open the door to other witnesses who could appear before this committee. So indeed, I feel that this is the same thing. And I'd like to impose on the members present here today, or I'd like to ask them to think about this, and perhaps we could come to the conclusion that it's essentially the same thing, and that it involves a repeat, which goes against the procedures.
Thank you, Mr. Fergus. I have Madam Shanahan next, and then Mr. Green, I'll hear from you.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Donc, je vais aborder là.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with my colleague. I'd like to hear from my colleagues. What really is the difference between the motion that we worked on? We worked on extensively, and that we adopted yesterday, and the motion here before us today. I can understand that a few weeks ago or a little while ago, everyone was working on their own motion. So I can understand that some of them overlap. So indeed, I think this is an important point, and indeed it's the chair who's responsible for looking at that. Looking at the nature of the motion, because as I said earlier, we're talking about the same groups of witnesses, the same questions. I think the work we have before us will meet the same objectives as those in this motion, the one we're currently looking at.
Thank you. Mr. Green, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And now let's be clear. The motion in the original intent that we passed here earlier was one particularly related to the complexities around WE scandal, the WE scandal. The WE scandal is so complex with so many layers. We're going to have so many documents and people pertaining to that one particular point in time that my colleagues' response here, like this is the fourth ethical violation by the Prime Minister. You'll remember there's a cash for access. You'll remember the ministerial rules that have been broken, which in fact, it is the Prime Minister's responsibility, as I understand it, to enforce the ministerial rules, but they're not being enforced. The motion that you have before us will take into I would imagine, would take into context past ethical transgressions by all governments. Most certainly and notably the three that have been lined up by this current Prime Minister, the Trudeau report. What happened to the recommendations made under that? What lessons were learned? That was a question, Madam Chair, that I asked in question period. I wanted to know, in terms of holding accountability, what lessons have been learned by this government. And I firmly believe, based on what I've seen roll out over the last 3 weeks on the WE scandal, you know, how soon we forget, that there's going to be more than enough documentation for that particular study to be zeroed in on that particular point in time. And what my colleague, Mr. Angus, is trying to bring here is an opportunity for us, again, to come to a place where we can look at all the policies and procedures, including having reference to all of these other reports, all of these other instances. But based on the discussion that we had at this committee, the focus of the other motion is particularly around WE and all the various aspects in which the governing party and its cabinet have transgressed lobbying rules, ministerial mandate letters, conflicts of interest, very significant things. Refusing to recuse themselves. And so I think that's what makes this a unique standalone motion, is that this is, the previous motion is looking at the WE scandal specifically as it relates to documents and the conflicts of interest pertaining to Prime Minister. And this motion that we have before us is looking at, like, how did we get here? In fact, how do we continue to get here time and time and time and time again with this government? And that's the difference. And it's unfortunate that this happens so often, where we have to have two looks at it from different perspectives. But to suggest somehow, unless the members opposite have some kind of telepathic knowledge that they know that we're going to be asking the same questions in both meetings to these people, I think, you know, in fact, is a difficult thing for anybody to do. And if you could do that, you'd be probably in a different position. So I'm still strongly urging members to support this, notwithstanding that we have many motions to come forward that we can work on how we want to work together in terms of, you know, getting through the first motion and then hopefully getting into the second one. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving over to Mr. Gerritsen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate the comments made by Mr. Green a few moments ago. And I, you know, genuinely respect and believe that the intent here is to produce a good study that can be referred back to Parliament to offer ways of doing things to improve the process that we have for everybody. And so in that light, you know, I'm going to go back to what I said previously. I raised an issue about my only issue with this being the preamble in here. And Mr. Green's response to that was that he didn't want to do that because this is really Mr. Angus's motion and he can't be here today. But I would suggest that he is here in place of Mr. Angus today, and that I'm sure that Mr. Angus has put his full faith and trust in his abilities to represent him while he's here. And I think that I can say that it'll be so much easier for me to vote in favor of a motion like this and to support something like this if that preamble wasn't there. I don't know why, talking about the culture of ethical permissiveness, these are subjective opinions, and rightfully so. People hold those opinions, but it doesn't mean that they are accurate. But more importantly, those opinions do not impact the resolve portion or the direction that this motion is providing to the committee to undertake its work. As a matter of fact, it will mean nothing. And I would suggest to Mr. Green that if he genuinely, as he just asked, for all committee support to vote in favor of this, that he would equally agree that that preamble does not contribute anything to the work that needs to be done that will be given through the direction of the resolve clauses of this motion. So therefore, Madam Chair, I would move that we remove the preamble. So from the first whereas up to and including the committee, and then start again after up to and including Canadian law. So remove everything from the first whereas up to and including Canadian law, and so that it would read that the committee move that pursuant to standing order the committee undertake, and so on. And I think, it's just my opinion, if I just speak to it very briefly, Madam Chair, I think that if Mr. Green's intent is genuine, that he would really like to see all committees support this, he can definitely understand why, as a member that sits on the side of the House as the government, I would have a difficult time voting in favor of a motion that had all of that preamble in it. And if his intention really is to see more people on this committee vote in favor of this, then he would be in favor of removing that preamble, because it offers nothing in terms of giving direction or the work, or will in no way whatsoever impact the work that will be done by this committee. It just takes out, in my opinion, some political cheap shots that are just clouding what otherwise would be a really good study for this committee to undertake.
Thank you, Mr. Gerritsen. Mr. Gerritsen has now moved an amendment to the motion. Does anyone wish to speak to that amendment? Mr. Green.
Thank you. I find it most curious that the rationale that the member puts forward in terms of making something palatable to accept or not accept is then, assaulted by suggesting that my colleague was using political cheap shots, which of course would preclude me, based on his own logic, from supporting his amendment. So from that perspective, I will not be supporting clearly the amendment, and we'll keep everything as is and we'll let it go to a vote.
Thank you, Mr. Green. I will now move to a vote on the amendment as presented by Mr. Gerritsen. You may. I will ask the clerk to conduct the vote.
Okay. On the amendment of Mr. Gerritsen, Mr. Fergus.
I support this amendment.
Madam Shanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Gerritsen.
Yes.
Mr. Scarpaleggia.
Yes.
Mr. Amos.
Oui.
Mr. Barrett.
No.
Mr. Lloyd.
No.
Mr. Courig.
No.
Monsieur Fortin.
No.
Mr. Green.
Nope.
The committee has voted, and it is once again a tie. 5 yes, 5 no. The chair votes no. Moving back to the original motion. I have no other speakers on the list at this time, and so I will move to a vote on the motion. Yes.
With my regrets to the clerk, could I get a recorded vote, please? Okay.
So you'll recall that this is the motion as amended, and I will now give it to the clerk to take a recorded vote at this time.
Give me a second. On the motion of Mr. Green as amended, Mr. Fergus.
Madam Clerk, with regret that we could have had a unanimous vote, I'm going to be voting against this motion.
Madame Shanahan.
No.
Mr. Gerritsen.
No. No.
Mr. Scarpaleggia.
No.
Monsieur Amos.
No.
Mr. Barrett.
Yes.
Mr. Lloyd.
Yes.
Mr. Couric.
I vote yes.
Monsieur Fortin.
Oui.
Mr. Green.
Oui.
In just a moment. The vote then is 5-4 and 5 against. As the chair, I vote yes. Returning to the main speaking list as I have it here, I have Madam Shanahan next, followed by Mr. Couric. Madam Shanahan, the floor is yours.
Chair, I would like to move the motion that I gave notice of motion earlier, that in relation to the motion passed on July 22nd to ensure the privacy and security of this personal information of Canadians, the committee adopt the following procedures for the handling of these documents: that the documents not be emailed to members, staff, or anyone else; that for the consideration of the documents during in-camera meetings, numbered paper copies be provided to committee members by the clerk at the start of any meeting at which they will be considered, and that they be returned to the clerk at the end of the meeting; that no staff and no mobile or electronic devices be allowed for the duration of the in-camera meeting; that the documents be held in the clerk's office, and that outside of in-camera committee meetings, members may only view the documents in the clerk's office, and that no mobile or electronic devices may be in the room when the documents are being reviewed.
I have Mr. Barrett. Oh, Mr. Fergus. Mr. Couric. Mr. Green. Mr. Barrett, the floor is yours. Ms. Shanahan.
Well, thanks, Madam Chair. When we dealt with the motion passed yesterday, it was the will of the committee that the review of the documents requested be done in camera. And I find it ironic that while the integrity of some members of the cabinet has been called into question in recent days, to my knowledge, the integrity of members of this committee has not. And unless it is the suggestion of government members of the committee that all matters dealt with in camera must be done in such a fashion, which I think is unnecessary and dramatic, I'll be voting against the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fergus.
I would Madam Chair, first I'd like to thank the member from the NDP I would like to thank the committee for its collective wisdom in agreeing to keep the matters in camera Specifically, I'd like to thank the members from the NDP for supporting that motion. As I mentioned yesterday, I really did feel, and I still do feel, that we've opened the door to a practice which I think sooner than any of us will think, will believe will be regrettable. We might want to close that barn door later. But that being said, the committee chose to adopt this motion, and I salute the committee, and in particular the NDP for agreeing to trying to limit the scope of the information which is going to be collected from private individuals. I think, Madam Speaker, that if we are going to say that this is giving us an opportunity, and I'm not calling into question. Mr. Barrett raises a fair point. I'd like to reassure him that no one is calling into question the rectitude of members to respect the in-camera process. But what Madam Shanahan has actually raised is, frankly, nothing more than spelling out the practice. It's making explicit what usually has been implicit in the practices of this House in terms of dealing with in-camera material. And so this way, you're really ensuring that this kind of information doesn't through whatever means gets distributed beyond the members of around this table. And it doesn't impede us in any way, because it allows us to continue to do the work. It allows us to examine the material that has been requested. It allows us to make a report and to make that report known. So I think the principle, which you can accuse me of many things, but I think one thing you can't accuse me of being is not consistent. And I remain consistent on this point, is that this is information. This is now politicians investigating politicians. And I think this could lead to some real trouble down the line. And so I'd be happy to engage with any members who would at least give this a fair listen, a fair consideration, to see if this is something that we can, that we can agree to. And we should take the time that is necessary for people to have the opportunity to consider this and consider what we're trying to do. And I'd be, Madam Speaker, if someone want to consider this and set forward a time by which we can come back and make a decision on this shortly, I'd be open to that. But we would need to make sure that we try to, before this information comes in and gets distributed around, we really should think about what we want to do here and try to preserve the integrity of our committee. And like I said, it could start off with this and this particular situation, but this can easily, ça peut déraper facilement, Madame la Présidente.
It could easily go off the rails. And there could start being inquiries on all sorts of things, on all sorts of people's private lives, MPs, their families. If the committee decides that this is the path they want to take, well, that's how it is. We have to accept that. But in my opinion, we could establish guidelines and safeguards to ensure that we don't just go off the rails here and make sure that we make explicit what it means when we're in camera. Privilege is maintained, but at least that way it's extremely clear what precedent we're setting. It will be really clear and precise for future committees. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Keurig, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I'll keep my comments very, very brief. And I think that largely what the motion is certainly quite extraordinary. To not allow hardly a calculator into the room is quite something when dealing with the issues that I believe Canadians have tasked Canada's Parliament and its political leaders to deal with. I have great concern that these limitations would be put on proceedings of this committee that would so specifically dictate what may or what a specific outcome should be with respect to a committee's direction. It's very, very limiting. It puts a stranglehold on how this committee would be able to proceed within the context of dealing with a motion that was passed just the other day. Mr. Fergus just referred to trying to preserve the integrity of this committee, and I agree, but I think that it's incumbent upon all members to ensure that the integrity of this committee is preserved and that there is a trust associated with that to do what's right. And ultimately, it's Canada's Parliament that has to hold its government to account. And suffice to say, I won't be supporting the motion, but would say very, very clearly that in relationship to the data, the information that's been asked to be provided, and the full scope of what the motion that was adopted yesterday is, it should be treated with respect to ensure that, just like all matters that this committee considers, that we should treat all aspects of the work we do with the utmost respect and care to the offices to which we hold. Thank you.
Green.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, to the clerk, if I'm able to. Yes, through you to the clerk, if I'm able to. What is the precedent of this? Because it strikes me as a precaution that would be saved for national security interests. Like, I think to my honorable member and colleague Don Davies, who when was appointed, shared with me this the level of security they have around those meetings. Is that a precedent that in anybody's recent history from the clerk's perspective where you would lock down the ethics commission in that type of way? Has that happened here before?
So the clerk has just told me that it's not unusual. It has been done in the past, particularly in when this committee deals with personal or sensitive information, and that it's done.
Defense. Point of order, speakers list? No, I'm just kidding.
Indeed, speakers list is moved. So, Madam Chair, we just had a question from Mr. Green regarding, is this a usual practice this.
I'll save the agony of even going down that road and just suggest to you that at this point, without having been able to confer with my colleague, to be able to bind him in one way or another in terms of his future meetings, I'm not comfortable moving forward with this motion and would suggest that there be a tabling of this motion until such time as which we have the opportunity to confer, given that it was put here in a relatively short notice, although we are in committee business. I'll just share to the mover of the motion that I'm not comfortable at this point without conferring where I'm going to go on this. So it would probably be in their best interest to table it.
Ms. Shanahan, the floor is yours.
Oh, it is mine. Okay, very good. Yeah, so the purpose of this motion is indeed to give us the parameters in which to deal with the request for the documents that was adopted yesterday, and in fact, it is in the spirit of remarks that were made by your, if I can say, Chair, by our regular permanent member here from the NDP when we adopted the standing orders, particularly the addition to the standing order, which stipulated that any motion to go in camera should be debatable and amendable, and that the committee may only meet in camera for the following purposes: A, to discuss administrative matters of the committee and witness selection; B, examine draft reports; C, briefings concerning national security; and D, to discuss matters involving an individual's private information. And furthermore, minutes of in-camera meetings should reflect on the results of all votes taken by the committee, with the exception of votes regarding the consideration of draft report, including how each member voted, and a recorded vote is requested. And I just have here some of Mr. Angus's remarks from that meeting of February 19, 2020, where he says, "I think the intention of my colleague is fair. I think we have to trust each other, that we're not going to abuse that. I'm fair with the language. I think there's an understanding here. We do not want to damage someone who's not done anything wrong, but there may be information. So I think it's fair. I'm willing to accept it. I don't think we can anticipate all the ways in which it can be used, and the language may be getting harder and harder. So I would agree with that. And so I certainly think that the amendment is excellent. So I think that it's in that spirit. And I certainly have seen with other committees that I participated on that the actual consultation of documents and so on is done in that way. And perhaps with the chair's permission, the clerk could speak to us about some of the ways in which this is the privacy of documents, of sensitive documents, is safeguarded. So I think that that's what the motion is stipulating. So it's very clear. And there have been things that have happened in the past, and it's part of the reason why I am looking forward to having a briefing by the law clerk on what our duty of care is here, what we can and can't do, because I don't think there's any member here that wants to take this, that wants to interfere, and how shall I say, to be treating sensitive information in a way that is harmful. And so I wonder if my colleague would agree that the docs, the documents that we're requesting, and I will ask the clerk for the email, what does the distribution look like? If my colleague would agree that if this is not resolved, that the request should not go out if this is not resolved by the time the documents have been received by the clerk, because I think we need to have clarity on how to handle these documents. Is this something that my colleague from from the NDP party would agree to. And I'm sorry if I mixed up Green and NDP. I tend to do that with your name. Does that happen to you, Mr. Green?
Green
that
is the new orange, and orange is the new green. It's all good. I've been called a lot of things. So I don't know if I have the ability through the chair to respond to that or not.
Mr. Green, normally I would stick to the speaking list.
That's fine.
So I'll continue down. You are on there.
Thank you.
The speaking list is as follows: Mr. Lloyd, Mr. Garrettson, Mr. Scarpalagia, Mr. Fergus, Mr. Barrett, and Mr. Green. Mr. Lloyd, the floor is yours.
Yeah, this is a very interesting topic, and I don't wish to preclude any members from bringing this up again, but given that my colleague from the NDP isn't comfortable with the wording of this motion as he has stated, I would just move that we adjourn debate on this motion.
Madam Chair, can we suspend for 2 minutes just to caucus on this?
I have a motion on the floor. Suspend? Okay. Sure. I'll suspend for 1 moment.
Thank you.
In the library with the candlestick.
I did say one. Well, I said 1 moment, 1 minute. I'm not really sure. I will now move to a vote on that motion. Would you like that recorded, Mr. Barrett?
Motion to adjourn the debate. Please say yay when Mr. Amos,
No.
Mr. Barrett,
Yes.
Mr. Lloyd. Mr. Kirk.
I vote yes.
Yes.
Mr. Fortin. Oui. Mr. Green.
No.
All right. Since we will continue to debate the motion in front of us here today, presented by Madam Shanahan, I will continue down the speakers list. The speakers list is as follows: Mr. Gerritsen, Mr. Scarpelleggia, Mr. Fergus, Mr. Barrett, and Mr. Green. Mr. Gerritsen, the floor is yours.
A point of order, please. Yesterday, we passed a motion. It was amended, and it places guidelines on the way documents are managed. We decided all of that yesterday. Coming back to yesterday's decision today, strikes me as going against the procedure. I don't think we can reasonably continue debating this one, because ultimately it's an amendment to yesterday's motion. It's too late for that.
Thank you, Mr. Forte. Mr. Gerritsen.
I'll withdraw. I don't need to speak, Madam Chair.
Mr. Scarpelleggia.
Boswell.
Mr. Fergus.
May I ask a point of information?
It's not a thing, but you may ask a question.
You're right.
I'm sorry. I withdraw my comment. I would like to know, is it possible that we could put this debate on ice for this particular motion until the next meeting?
That was the motion that just moved.
You could move that motion.
I'll vote in favor.
So the motion, just to be clear, the motion that Mr. Lloyd just moved was one that would have adjourned this
Then we would
debate.
have gone straight to a vote.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I'm
So if you wish to move that, Mr. Fergus, you are welcome to move that.
May I have a minute, please? So it takes nothing away, Madam Chair, in terms of when the motion can be considered.
So the motion would have to be moved again by Madam Shanahan, and then it could be we would resume debate on it.
And it remains on notice, though, Madam
It
Chair?
remains on notice.
It's tabled.
It's tabled in this committee, and so it can be considered at any time should Ms. Shanahan decide to move it.
And Madam Chair, that's not just during meetings that are committee business. It's now that it's a...
That is correct. Since notice has been given, Madam Shanahan can bring this motion forward at any point in time when this committee is meeting.
So there is. These.
I was just getting ready. I didn't mean to interrupt.
So then.
I need to respect the speaking list.
So I can
Yes.
just read this. Sorry, I should take out my reading glasses. Page of 51. This is
I'm going to suspend the meeting for 2 minutes, and then I will come back. Before giving the floor, who held the floor just before suspending, Mr. Fortin, I desire to return to you. My apologies. I misunderstood. You did raise a point of order and you were asking for a ruling, and so I will deliver that. Your point of order was with regards to the motion that has been put forward by Madam Shanahan. And I believe the point that you raised was that you feel this is similar and already covered within the original, within the motion that was passed yesterday in our discussions having to do with the meetings being in camera when the documents are being discussed. That was an amendment made and accepted yesterday, and so therefore you feel that amendment and this motion before us today are essentially the same. Am I understanding you correctly?
They're not the same, but c'est pas la même chose, mais c'est.
It's not exactly the same, but it's contradictory. On the one hand, there's the matter of protecting the information in the documents, and that matter we debated for some time yesterday. To say that we should protect the information in the documents, how should we do that? And ultimately, when it comes to managing these documents, we decided that they would be examined in camera. And then today, we're being told that that's not enough. We want more. I'm saying it's too late for that. We've already made a decision about the level or how we're going to protect the documents. We can't come back to that today. And even if we adopted this motion, next week we could start all over again and say, oh, well, in the end, we're going to be able to bring cameras into the room. And then the week after, but only Apple phones, not Samsung. At that point, we could go around and around forever. Okay, we agree. We need to protect the information in these documents. Yesterday, we decided how we're going to do that. Now we should move on, in my opinion. That's the point of order.
Mr. Fonte, thank you. I'm going to ask to suspend for one moment while I confer with the clerk. Thank you. So with regard to the motion that is currently in front of us, and as it compares to the amendment that was made to yesterday's motion, which has been accepted by this committee, I would rule that the motion in front of us is acceptable. The reason being is this. Yesterday, the amendment dealt with the capacity in which we would meet, whether it would be public or in camera. The motion before us today deals with process, the process that will be upheld while we meet, whether that meeting happens in camera or in public. And so I would deem those two separate things. With that, I will move to the next on my speakers list, which is Mr. Fergus, as he had the floor before we suspended.
I'd like to thank the chair for allowing me the opportunity to caucus and to discuss this issue. And I beg the forgiveness of my colleagues around the table. I will, as a result, withdraw and not. I will cede my time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fergus. Moving over to Mr. Barrett, then.
I'll cede my time.
Moving to Mr. Green.
Thank you, and I do appreciate the opportunity to provide comment on this. And we've heard from the government side rationale referencing my colleague, and I would suggest that the references that were provided, just for the purpose of people watching, were in context of whether or not we go into camera or not. And I believe that we held that up yesterday when we supported going in camera. And so I don't believe that that's the rationale why I would support this motion. But I will recall when I was visiting this committee with my colleague, Mr. Angus, the way in which he argued for the need to have discretion and privacy around the sensitive nature of the information that would come to this committee. And I'll suggest to you, Madam Chair, to members of this committee, that I would have hoped we could have landed in a better situation from the get-go in terms of where we would have had more support for the Prime Minister to be before us from the governing side. We didn't get that. But what we did get clear about was that we wanted that kind of privacy. And I think what this motion does, in fairness to my colleague from the bloc, is it does beg the question of like what constitutes an in-camera meeting. When is an in-camera meeting not an in-camera meeting? Having said that, and just drawing on my own experience, I would never want to be accused in a situation as sensitive as this of leaking information. Nor do I think it would ever be the intention of my colleague to leak information from an in-camera meeting. I think that would be a grave violation of the trust that we have among our members. And I'm also not naive enough to know that this doesn't happen from time to time, and particularly around these sensitive issues. So for that reason, I'll be supporting the motion to have this extra, suspenders on the in-camera meeting, for lack of a better term, the extra protections, so that we can never be accused of leaking this sensitive information. What we want to ultimately get to, I believe, is the truth. I believe we will get there. I will believe we will be able to communicate to our constituents and Canadians what that truth is, notwithstanding the salacious details which may come forward in this in-camera meeting. I'll also go on the record and note, because I don't know if I'll be here next week, that the extent to which the government is going to provide these extra precautions around the information also, to me, suggests just how sensitive the information may turn out to be. So that will certainly unfold, and I wanted to give this full rationale so that my friends to the much further right of me in the position of this room, and ideologically, understand why I've come to this decision to support the government in this motion, and also to let the government know that I believe that my colleague in his original intention was to provide a protection to Margaret Trudeau and the private family members of the Trudeau family. And my hope, to go on the record for the last time, is that in future consideration, because I would agree that this is only the beginning of an ongoing process, that parties will keep people's family members with the same kind of consideration and privacy that is being afforded to the Prime Minister's family. Because quite frankly, what I don't want the public to think is that the Prime Minister's family is getting a special kind of privacy consideration. So that is not the case. That is not what is happening here. That should have been any member of any person's family brought forward, that we would also fight to have these types of protections in place so that these types of details weren't exposed for the media and whatever ensuing circus comes our way. Thank you.
Mr. Gerritsen, the floor is yours.
No, I don't have anything to say. Looking forward to the vote, Madam Chair.
Excellent. All righty then. Moving on to the vote. Yes, Mr. Barrett.
Can I have a recorded vote, please, Madam?
Oh, Mr. Barrett, I'm so glad you asked.
You're going to forget?
We got to get these rooms updated so it's just boop. Totally. Well, they're against any kind of change. That's the whole purpose of being conservative.
He is only like 34 years old. I mean, he can't. Difficult.
Perhaps I'll take this opportunity just to clarify for the committee. Just as I conferred with the clerk, it should be noted that the motion, as it reads here, that we are going to vote on, should it be successful, should it pass, this is for this study. This does not set precedent or a way of being for this committee for every single study. So it is just for this study, according to the motion as passed yesterday. Just to clarify.
On the motion of Ms. Shanahan, please say yay when your name is called if you're in favor, nay if you're opposed. Ms. Shanahan. Yay. Mr. Fergus.
Oui.
Mr. Gerritsen.
Yes.
Mr. Scarpaleggia.
Yay.
Ms. Dama.
Yes.
Mr. Barrett.
No.
Mr. Lloyd.
No.
Mr. Kirk.
I vote no.
Monsieur Fortin.
No.
Mr. Green.
Yes.
We have 6 voting yes and 4 voting no. The motion passes. Returning to my main speaking list, Mr. Fergus, I will add you to it. You're very welcome. Moving to my main speaking list, I move to Mr. Keurig at this time.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And it's, I think, been a very productive meeting, and in the spirit of that productivity, I would, and in similar light to 2 things that I would mention. I will be moving a motion that is similar in spirit to what I moved yesterday. However, after consultation with colleagues and hearing from the clerk about and in regard to much of the testimony that has taken place over the last number of days, wanting to make sure that the motion was perfectly in line with both what the mandate of this committee is in relation to standing orders and all aspects of what we are attempting to accomplish here to build that. And I keep using this this word of trust to rebuild that trust that seems to be shaken in regard to this government. So I will keep my my comments very, very brief, and for members or anyone watching, they can look at my comments from yesterday, as this is substantially very much the same, just with a few small adjustments to honor what has been discussed, and in further collaboration, as I mentioned, with the clerk and my colleagues. But Madam Chair, I would move this motion, and I do have copies to be distributed in both official languages. Just as a note, there is English on one side, French on the other. So I would move the following motion as it's being handed out. That pursuant to Standing Order 1083H6 and to the committee's current study to review the safeguards which are in place to avoid and prevent conflicts of interest and federal government procurement, contracting, grant contribution, and other expenditures, the chair be instructed to write a letter to each member of cabinet requiring they disclose whether they had knowledge of the personal relationships between those listed and we, Me to We Corporation, We Charity, We Education for Children Limited, We Villages, We Schools, the Me to We Foundation, the We Charity Foundation, Me to We Asset Holdings, Inc., Me to We Property Management, Inc., Me to We Style, Inc., or any other entity created by Mark Kielburger, Craig Kielburger, or both of them prior to the Cabinet's decision to award the administration of the Canada Student Services Grant to the We Charity Foundation. A. Justin Trudeau and his family, Bill Morneau and his family, Katie Telford, or Seamus O'Regan. Additionally, that the letter should require that all members of Cabinet disclose whether they, their families, or their relatives have connections to We, Me to We Corporation, We Charity, We Education for Children Limited, We Villages, We Schools, the Me to We Foundation, the We Charity Foundation, Me to We Asset Holdings, Inc., Me to We Property Management, Inc., Me to We Style, Inc., or any other entity created by Mark Kielburger, Craig Kielburger, or both of them. That a response be ordered within a week of the receipt of this letter, but no later than 2 weeks after the adoption of this motion. I believe, Madam Chair, that in light of my comments yesterday and the spirit in which we need to shine light on the ever-developing situation regarding the situation that the government finds themselves in, and especially with the cabinet. And we keep learning, seemingly by the minute, more and more, that this would be extremely relevant in getting Canadians the answers that they deserve from their government on this very, very important issue. So with that, I thank you very much and to members of the committee for entertaining this motion, and look forward to the following debate and what I hope is an expeditious passing of this accountability measure. Thank you.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair?
Je voudrais simplement...
Yes, I just want to state something. There's an issue in the French version. We don't have Me to We Style, Inc. in the first paragraph. It's a small mistake, I understand. It's an omission.
Accordingly, I apologize to my French colleague. My French is less than adequate.
Juste une coquille.
On a point of order?
Thanks.
The motion now has been moved by Mr. Keurig and will be considered by the committee. Mr. Barrett is first on the speaking list.
In just to make some very brief remarks and let the chair move on with the speaking list. With respect to Mr. Keurik's motion, I believe that in light of the work that the committee has decided to undertake with the motions that have been passed over our last two meetings, that having responses from members of cabinet will ease the work of the committee, and will also ease the work of cabinet in that I won't presuppose the work of the subcommittee on who this committee will decide to call as witnesses. However, this motion will likely shorten the list of ministers that the official opposition will seek. and having those responses duly received by the clerk and provided to the committee will allow us to focus on the witnesses decided by the subcommittee. But I do think that it will then be a shorter list. So for that reason, I'll be supporting Mr. Keurik's motion.
Thank you. Mr. Fortin.
Mr. Fortin? Yes, it was a point of order. I only said that there was an omission in the French version. I understand that Mr. Kirk said that he'll amend it. I just wanted to make sure that the French version is identical to the English version.
Thank you. We will make note of that. The clerk will make sure that that's changed. Thank you. Mr. Garrettson and then Mr. Fergus.
So just reading this, and I realize that it's similar to the one that was moved before. If I understand this correctly, what you're requesting is that within 1 week, every cabinet minister disclose whether they, their families, or their relatives have connections. What kind of connection? Like they know somebody, they volunteered once. My mother's family has 7 brothers and sisters. The number of cousins that I have is endless. I mean, like, and their children. That's, and by the way, usually if you would word something like this with a genuine intent, you would say, to the best of their knowledge. But you haven't even done that. You said to disclose, full stop. Not even saying to the best of their knowledge. You're saying that it will be disclosed. And you didn't even say like a financial connection or financial relationship. So you're doing one of two things, in my humble opinion, although a lot will argue it's not humble. You're doing one of two things. You're either trying to set up a scenario where people are not going to be able to deliver this information, in which case you will then attempt to find vulnerabilities and weak spots in what they deliver to you. Or two, you're creating a scenario where you know cabinet will reject this so that you can then say they refuse to give you the information. And in either scenario, what you're doing is you're not being genuine. Again, in my opinion. So, I mean, you, would have thought that you would have had some relatively decent language in this to define what a connection is, define what a relationship is. You would have thought you would have used language to the effect of, to the best of my knowledge. I think, and you would have thought that you would have given more time to compile this information. It's extremely cumbersome on somebody who perhaps has a large family to be able to deal with that. So I'm not a permanent member of this committee, Madam Chair. I am here substituting in for somebody. I've had a great time. I would really love to. I would really love to tuck my kids in bed tonight. I got a 2-hour drive ahead of me. So with that, I'd move that we adjourn the meeting.
Mr. Garrison has moved that the committee now adjourn.
How dare you? How dare you? So
Mr. Barrett.
Just for my situational awareness, Madam Chair, on a point of order, can you advise what happens to the motion that's on the floor once the meeting adjourns? Is it then at the next sitting of the committee? Is it for any purpose? Is it then? Is it? So anyway, I think you know where I'm going for. I'm just looking to find out what happens with this motion. Can it just be picked up the next time the committee meets, or can it only be resumed when the committee meets for committee business? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Let me confirm. Mr. Barrett, similar to what we've done in the past, if the committee wills to adjourn this meeting, we would pick it up. We would pick up debate at the next committee meeting where we do committee business. I will call the question at this point in time. So voting on the motion put forward by Mr. Gerritsen to adjourn this meeting.
All those in favor of the motion, please say yay when your name is called. All those opposed, please say nay when your name is called. Mr. Gerritsen.
Yes.
Mr. Scarpaleggia. Mr. Fergus. Ms. Damoff.
Yes.
Ms. Shanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Barrett.
I'd like to get home to see my kids as well. Yes.
Mr. Lloyd.
Yes.
Mr. Craig.
In the spirit of getting home to see our kids, I vote yes.
Mr. Fortin.
Oui.
And Mr. Green.
Just doing it for the children. Absolutely, yes.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we are now adjourned.
Mark Garrison, the great